the importance of implementation planning in digital transformation, new pricing models for ERP vendors in the ERP software space, and the role of digital transformation executive sponsors. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode number 191 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Megatron.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world to reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And we are also the sponsor of this podcast, so you can learn more about us by going to thirdstage-consulting.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions, and you can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So be sure to check it out there. You can also see the past episodes of the show and subscribe on whatever platform you'd prefer at transformationgroundcontrol.com. Joining me today, as always, is my co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great show planned for us here today. We've got a few things we're going to get to. We're going to talk about, to open up, we're going to get to some social media questions. We're also going to get to some newsworthy topics, a couple newsworthy topics that are really interesting. First of all, we're going to talk about Salesforce and how they're considering a new consumption-based pricing model for their AI-driven product called Agentforce. And we're also going to talk about new reporting requirements for advanced AI and cloud computing, some regulatory requirements that are being imposed by global governments. So we'll talk about that here today and what that means for the future of AI. And then later in the show, we are going to get into a sort of a deep dive conversation as it relates to implementation planning and phase 0 of digital transformation. And this is a really important phase of a project that if you skip this phase of the project, it's going to create a lot of problems, if not failure, for your digital transformation. So we're going to talk about that implementation planning phase, what it means, why it's so important, what some of the things are that you should do to make sure you've got that solid implementation plan and phase 0 deliverable in place before you start deploying new technology. And that's the key operative term there, is it needs to be before you start deploying technology, which most organizations don't do. And that's why so many projects fail. So we're going to get into that here today. And then later, we're also going to talk about the role of leaders and executive sponsors in digital transformation. So if you're an executive, if you're part of an executive steering committee, or if you want to educate your executive steering committee and you're working for a project team that reports up to an executive steering committee, you might want to share this conversation or this podcast episode with them, or at least that segment of the podcast, because we're going to talk about where executive leaders oftentimes fail in their leadership of digital transformations and what they should be doing differently to ensure that the project is successful. So we'll get to all that stuff here in today's episode. But before we jump into some of that content, you've got some social media questions that we've received here recently. Darian, what have you got in store for us?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions today. This first one is about agile approaches. So agile's popularity in some parts can be attributed to the advancement in tech, adoption of microservices, advancement in cloud, and XaaS, JavaScript frameworks, Web 3.0, streaming, etc. have allowed piecemeal development, so it's crucial for agile adoption. Without these things, say 15 years ago, a lot more agile adoptions would have failed. What are your thoughts on this, Eric? Is this right or is this wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've talked a lot about agile, on my YouTube channel and some of my blogs and whatnot, and I have some strong opinions on, over relying on agile or maybe over prescribing agile. And so I think, agile is something it's a good mindset to introduce into projects. And I like the fact that it's focused on speed and moving quickly and not getting too bogged down in analysis paralysis, which a lot of organizations do. But at the same time, I think the flaws with Agile are that you tend to overlook some of the end-to-end business process definition and some of the decision making that needs to happen before you start deploying solutions. And Agile at times can run counter to that. So I think it's sort of like a healthy dose. If you can, I think we finally reached a point where the pendulum, was maybe swung a little too far towards waterfall, and now it's probably swung too far towards Agile. And I think the right answer longer term is going to be somewhere in the middle, finding that right blend of a hybrid approach that covers both. So I don't know that, having learned about Agile any sooner would have necessarily solved the problems in the industry. But I think what will really solve the problems in the industry is finding the right recipe, which we still haven't found. I think a lot of organizations still have not found that right balance. They either go too far one extreme or the other. And the key is to find the right blend or the right recipe. And there is no one right recipe. It's going to be the recipe that makes sense for who you are as a business and sort of the culture of your organization. And so you've got to define that blend that's going to make the most sense for you. So until we figure that part out, I think we're going to continue to have problems. But I think you're right, or that it's a good question or comment that if we had learned more about Agile sooner and learned how to introduce it better into our transformations, we could be successful sooner.
Yeah, I feel like that answer kind of ties into our second social question here. So the second one is upfront planning can go terribly wrong, whether it's for process transformation or product management. However, the same can't be said for Agile methodologies, as you're continually working with a MVP that demonstrates business value to investors so early on. I don't see this as a choice between Agile and Waterfall. A hybrid approach is most often successful. Even with Agile, we use Kanban systems. It's about choosing the right tool for the job. Traditional Waterfall has its place when its scope, budget, schedule, and quality are well defined upfront. And in those cases, phase-wise program management is ideal. Agile, on the other hand, excels when process or the product are still taking shape. Do you agree with this, Eric? I know you kind of just talked about this, finding the right approach when you were answering the last one, but what is your take on this question?
Yeah, I think it's really well said. I think, introducing Kanban and, total quality management or Lean Six Sigma, some of these other philosophies and mindsets, introducing them into the conversation is really important because they can coexist with Agile and Waterfall and that whole discussion around what should our philosophy and mentality be around our digital transformation. But I think the person asking this question hits on a really good, interesting point, which is for something that's for a more mature process where you're really trying to fine tune and optimize it and you're trying to continuously improve it. I think that's where, and that's where Lean, Six Sigma, and Kanban, and some of these other TQM, some of these Japanese TQM style philosophies from the 70s and 80s that still are prevalent in much of business today. In those types of environments, I think that's where, taking a less, I don't want to say less Agile, but not being too dependent on Agile and instead focusing more on sort of your end-to-end business process visibility and defining what you want your future state to be and really fine-tuning and identifying where those process improvements can and should be using metrics and data. That's the other part of TQM and Lean Six Sigma and Kanban and all that stuff. So much of it is focused on metrics and data. So I think if we can use, more of that waterfall mentality in those environments, that makes sense in a more mature, established set of business processes. But where Agile really thrives, in my opinion, is going to be in the more the areas of innovation or the areas of uncertainty. So let's just use AI as an example. Like, let's just say you're an organization that's trying to figure out how in the world are we going to use AI? How in the world could we use AI to rethink our business? And you may not know the answer to that. And no one person is probably going to be able to sit in a conference room and whiteboard every single, possibility of how AI could affect their business. They might have a good understanding or a good starting point. But where Agile comes in and where I think Agile can add a lot of value, especially like using AI as an example, is you might say, well, let's just buy an AI tool on a small scale. Let's test it out. Let's get some business people involved and start to build some use cases and pilots of how we might try to use AI. And we'll do some trial and error. We'll mess up some stuff. Some things will be complete disasters. Some things will be great successes. And we'll just test and learn from it on a low risk scale. And that's sort of the Agile mentality. And then once you find the things that work, like, hey, this is a really good use case, or this is something that could help the rest of the business, then you can start to scale it. And then you can start to use maybe more of a, you start to introduce some waterfall-ish sorts of mindsets where you start to define a more structured process for how you might use AI using that use case that you tested in an agile environment, and then you can scale it out across the organization. So I think that's the way you have to think about it, is like maybe it's areas of innovation and less maturity. That's where agile is really good. That's why it sort of originated in the software development space, is because you're creating something new. Whereas if you have established processes and you're trying to improve those processes, that's where agile sometimes runs counter to that. So I think it's just a matter of knowing when and where and how to use agile.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of AI, we have some great AI newsworthy topics today. So I'm really excited to get into those next.
Yes, Salesforce sort of leading the charge here on some potential different pricing for their AI agent force, or the AI-driven agent force. And then we're also going to talk about regulatory reporting requirements for advanced AI and cloud computing. We're going to get to that here in just a second after we take a quick break. And then later in the show, after we get through these newsworthy topics, we'll talk about implementation planning in phase 0. And then we'll also talk about the role of digital transformation leaders and executive sponsors. So got a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting, and I want to invite you to join our annual tech agnostic conference called Digital Stratosphere. Digital Stratosphere is a conference that features some of the industry's brightest minds, greatest thinkers, and it's a great opportunity to network with peers, other industry people, other CIOs, other project team members that are going through digital transformations or ERP implementations. We've got a great lineup of speakers this year. It's a 3-day event, a lot of great entertainment, networking opportunities. I'll be there as one of the keynote speakers, along with some of my favorite speakers in the industry as well, both within Third Stage Consulting, but also outside the company as well. So I encourage you to check it out and learn more. You can go to stratosphere2024.com to learn more about the event. You can see the agenda, the way it's shaping up, and you can see some of the past testimonials of people that have attended. And the event is October 2nd through the 4th, 2024. It's going to be based in Denver, Colorado, downtown Denver, beautiful downtown Denver in the fall, which is a great time to visit Denver if you haven't been. Again, stratosphere2024.com. Check out the agenda. Check out our early bird pricing for passes. And the other beautiful things, if you can't be here in person in Denver, which we hope you can, but if you can't, you can also join remotely as well. We have virtual passes available as well, so you're able to join from wherever in the world you might want to join from. So stratosphere2024.com, check it out, and I hope to see you there.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taflaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also find past episodes of this show at transformationgroundcontrol.com. This podcast is everything related to digital transformation, including the people, process, technology aspects of transformations. And the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, produced by Major Tom Productions. So thank you for being here today. And you've got a couple newsworthy topics here that we want to get to related to AI. What have you got for us, Darian?
Yeah, so this first one is for Salesforce. I know we talked about Salesforce a couple weeks ago on this podcast talking about their Agentforce platform. They now have come out and are planning to come out with a new consumption-based pricing model for this agent platform. So what this would do is it would charge around $2 per AI agent conversation. This comes as AI agents are expected to significantly reduce the need for human agents, raising concerns for the demand of Salesforce licenses. The CEO, Mark Benoff, envisions businesses becoming agent-first organizations with AI deeply integrated into Salesforce platforms. So with this, Eric, what are your thoughts on Salesforce shift to a consumption-based pricing model for AI agents? And do you think this approach will be widely adopted by other CRMs and ERP providers?
It's interesting because as you were describing this, and I hadn't heard the story until you mentioned it here today, but as you were describing this, it reminds me of the sort of the freemium model that so many software companies have built their businesses on, where you get the free trial version, and then as you want to add different features, you sort of incrementally start paying more, and then all of a sudden you look up and you've got this huge monthly or annual bill because you just started adding all this stuff to your tech stack. So I think it's a similar model that sort of gets you hooked, and then you slowly start paying more and more. So in terms of building a software business, I think it makes sense and it's pretty smart from their perspective. But if I'm thinking of it as a customer, or as a buyer of Salesforce, I just want to be careful and be sure to manage that carefully, because we were just talking about Agile in the last segment. And, the beauty and the blessing and the curse of Agile is it lets you try different things, incrementally on a small scale, but it starts to add up over time if you start introducing pieces of technology that incrementally cost more and more. And if you don't have the right controls in place, you can see how your IT spend can start to escalate pretty quickly. So I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a smart way for a vendor to price their product, but as a buyer, you just want to make sure you're smart about it and you're pretty deliberate and you're keeping an eye on how your spending is coming along there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with that, how do you think Salesforce focus on agent force organizations will impact overall CRM and ERP landscape, particularly in terms of customer support and engagement?
Yeah, that's the really interesting part of what you're saying here is, aside from the pricing model, just the fact that they have this and that they're focused on agent force, I think that's super interesting and super cool. I mean, I think a lot of organizations we're talking to, especially, consumer facing, like B2C types of organizations where they have high volumes of customer interactions at end consumer level. Those types of organizations have a lot to gain by using AI and chatbots and that sort of thing. And so these chatbots and AI-driven agents are becoming sort of really high priority use cases for some of these B2C sorts of organizations. So I think it's smart that Salesforce is focused on it. I think it provides a lot of opportunity for them to automate a very inefficient part of many of these B2C companies' businesses. And quite frankly, I think it would open up a big market to companies that maybe might have been more focused on a product like ServiceNow, where, ServiceNow is more of like a help desk, customer service center sort of software. And I wonder if they're part of why Salesforce is doing this is because they want to compete better with ServiceNow. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's part of their strategy, but in my mind, it seems like that would sort of maybe siphon off some business from ServiceNow. So I think it's a pretty smart way for Salesforce to sort of expand their offering and provide more value to their customers.
Sure. One challenge that we might face on the business side for people that are using Salesforce, what impact do you think this pricing model could have, on smaller businesses or startups that are more heavily dependent on Salesforce?
Well, I think it could, like I said before, it could incrementally increase and escalate the cost of Salesforce for a lot of customers, but it may not be an issue if it's delivering value. I mean, if suddenly Salesforce is charging a lot more money, but you're saving even more money, then no one's really going to complain about it. So I think it's up to Salesforce and their customers to make sure that it's providing value and that they've got the right set of tools and the right usage of the software to get the most value out of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It'll be interesting to see if other ERP and CRM softwares start to use this sort of model for their AI in the future, or
it's really interesting
in the future. But to switch gears here and go to more on the regulatory side of AI, the U.S. Department of Commerce Bureau of Industry and Security plans to implement new reporting requirements for advanced AI and cloud computing developers for national security purposes. This is one of the first times we've heard something from the US government on a regulatory thing they're thinking about implementing. So these rules will demand detailed reports on development, cybersecurity, and risk assessments to prevent AI misuse in areas like cyber attacks and weapon creation. As part of a broader regulatory trend post-EU's AI Act, these regulations could increase compliance costs and necessitate operational changes such as AI governance. However, there is a risk with these regulations that might stifle innovation, prompting fears during innovation efforts that we're in now. As we know, AI is changing like every single week that we're talking about it on the podcast. There's something new coming out. So people are concerned that maybe this bill will have regulatory effects on the tech process, similar is seen to the resistance on California's AI safety bill that they saw back when California implemented that. So with this, Eric, how do you think the Bureau of Industry and Security reporting requirements will impact strategic decisions for companies involved in AI and cloud computing?
Well, I think the good thing is it is going to force them to be cognizant of privacy and what happens to the data that they're collecting and processing on behalf of customers, because there's so much, it sort of opens up a potential loophole, of data privacy issues and potential cybersecurity attacks, all that stuff. In fact, we had on this podcast a few months ago, we've had Marcus Harris, who's an attorney, a prominent software attorney in this space. He's been on this podcast several times, but the last time he was on, I believe is the last time he was on, he talked about AI in particular and some of the intellectual property and privacy issues related to that. It was really interesting to hear his perspective, because even he as an IP attorney, this is all he does is intellectual property stuff. Even he, as of a few months ago, was grappling with what does this mean? And there's so much that hasn't yet been worked out in the legal system, just in courts and whatnot, as far as who owns IP. Like if I, for example, I'll give you an example, a personal example. I'm writing my next book using AI. I'm using ChatGPT, but I'm using my own content to reformat it into a book format. And so I'm going in with the assumption that I'm not going to own that copyright, or at the very least, AI is going to have some right to my work because it helped me create it. And that's part of what Marcus talks about in the interview. But for me, I write a book not because I want to have all these royalties, and I don't want to share the royalties with anyone. I do it because it's good exposure, it's credibility building. So I don't really care if I have to someday share royalties with OpenAI or whatever. So that's the least of my worries. But if I had some super sensitive, secret stuff that my company created and had a patent on or whatever, and I enter it into ChatGPT to analyze something, suddenly have I given up and exposed, given up some of my IP, exposed some of my IP, given the rights to some of my IP to some other party? Now what happens if someone hacks into the databases of OpenAI or whatever? I'm just giving examples here. That becomes a question that I think we have yet to see the real consequences of that. And so much of that is going to end up in courts for, I would say, a decade or more. We're probably going to be sorting through all this stuff legally. So I think it's good, long way of saying, I think it's good that, it's weird saying this out loud, because for those that listen to this podcast or read between the lines of what I say about politics, I'm not a huge fan of government intervention, but this is a case where I think, the government sort of spotlighting the importance of this is maybe a good thing, and it's going to get some of these AI tech companies to think more about it and to take it more seriously, and to help provide some clarity around it. Because I think that uncertainty around data privacy and IP and all that stuff, that's good. That could ultimately slow down the adoption of AI more than if you had government step in and sort of provide some more clarity.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with that, kind of want to ask you this follow-up question that goes with it. Is there long-term effects that you see these regulations have on, the tech industry's ability to innovate and change AI as rapidly as we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think oh man, that's a good question. Because on the one hand, it's cool to see the innovation that's happening in the AI space, but it is happening so fast, and we don't really know what the impact on society is going to be. And I just think, I don't know. I'm really torn on it, to be honest. There's part of me that thinks, you've got to get some guardrails in place here, put some speed limits in place, and sort of get some structure around it. But at the same time, it's, you think about it and you think, well, that's innovation. This is innovation, and this is a really innovative product and tool that's sort of reached a tipping point of mass adoption, or it's reaching that tipping point of mass adoption. Do you really want to slow that down and hinder that? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know that I'll have a strong opinion on this until we see how it all unfolds. I think, I might have a totally different opinion if, like, you look 5 years from now, if millions of people are losing their jobs because of AI, then you think, okay, we have kind of a problem here. We've created an opportunity here and some innovation, but now we've created some societal problems. Or it could be that government comes in too heavy-handed, slows things down too much, and then the AI industry sort of just, slows down their innovation and that sort of things, in which case I might have a different opinion. So unfortunately, I hate to say it, this is why I'm glad I'm not in government and I'd be a terrible politician, is because I don't have a good answer. I can't read the future on this one.
Yeah, I feel like this same kind of conversation when, EU AI Act came out, it's really hard to know what's going to come from this, and how it's going to affect innovation and what side it's really going to sway to, whether it's one extreme or the next. You don't really know until, I guess, it happens.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the audience, though. I mean, that's a good question for the audience here. Like, what do you think of AI and just regulation in general? Like, do we need more regulation? Is it going to stifle innovation? Is it going to create so many societal problems potentially that we should regulate it more? Do we have these IP problems we need to think about? I'd love to hear different perspectives from the audience. That might help me formulate a stronger opinion as well.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like the audience can give us some good either questions or some answers about what they think, and maybe we can talk about that in a future episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, that's good stuff. That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing those two newsworthy topics. AI, another episode where we can't help ourselves but talk about AI as part of our digital transformation discussion here today. So thank you for that. We're going to continue the conversation around digital transformation, and we're going to talk about implementation planning and phase zero, why it's so important to digital transformations, how it leads to failure if you don't do it, what are the components of implementation planning in phase zero. So what we want to do in this next segment is it's not a traditional podcast interview format like we typically would have. And in this case, we're actually going to dive into the mechanics of implementation planning in phase zero. We're going to talk about a methodology and a framework, and we're actually going to show you some visuals of it. And for those of you listening to the audio only podcast version, we're going to verbalize as much as we can so that you can sort of follow along. But if you are listening on an audio podcast version, you may want to actually check out the YouTube version of it just so you can see the slides that go along with this, the corresponding slides. And this is episode 191. If you just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, go to the section that has the YouTube video listing, just scroll down to episode 191, and you'll see this episode on there, and you can sort of fast forward to this part that we're about to get to, which is getting into implementation readiness and phase zero. So we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. We're going to talk about why it's so important, what it means, what the methodology looks like. And then later in the show, after this discussion, we'll get into executive sponsorship and what it means. What does it mean if you're an executive leader or part of an executive steering committee? What are your responsibilities? Where do executives oftentimes fail in their leadership of digital transformations? We're going to talk about all that stuff. So we've got a lot more to cover here in this episode. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say to me. I've been waiting for so long to hear.
I'm excited to share our newly released 2024 Digital Enterprise Operations Report. This free download is available on the Third Stage website at thirdstage-consulting.com. This report is truly packed full of technology-independent and agnostic insights for your project to ensure that you're strategically optimized for success. Download your copy today with the QR code in front of me or visit our website for more details.
Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting and your host of Transformation Ground Control. I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we publish. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
I could never be the right kind of girl for you. I could never be your woman.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode 191. This is Eric Kimberling, CEO of Third Stage Consulting. I'm here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, you can reach out to Mindy at Major Tom Productions. I've included her contact information below. If you'd like to feature your brand on this podcast, be sure to reach out to us. We'd love to have you be part of this conversation. So this next conversation is going to be an interesting one. We're going to take a slightly different format than our usual podcast interview approach to our sort of main segment here today. We're going to dive in and go pretty deep into implementation planning and phase zero, talk about why it's so important and what it means and what some of the different pieces of that methodology and framework are, and really want to give you some points that you can leave with to understand what it is you can and should be doing as part of your implementation to ensure that you address this phase zero implementation planning piece of things. Why do we name the title of the session "Skipping This Step Leads to Failure"? And I think that's really important because, one of the analogies I like to use when we're talking about implementation planning is building a house. If you think about how when you build a house, for those that have ever had a house built, or if you've been involved in construction or just conceptually, you understand how this all works. Generally, when you are going to build a house, you're going to do several things up front. You're going to first of all, hire an architect. You're going to hire someone that's going to help you design the house of your dreams, or the house the way you want it to work, or the way you want it to look, the way you want it to function. So you have the architect. You're also going to hire a general contractor who's going to manage all the moving parts and pieces of the construction. You're going to have a bunch of subcontractors. You'll have plumbers and electricians and drywall people and roofers, and all kinds of different subcontractors will be involved in helping build a house. And conceptually, that all makes sense. And you may be wondering, why are we talking about building a home when we're talking about digital transformation? And the reason I bring this up, and I love this analogy, is because a lot of times, and I'd say most of the time, I don't know what the percentage would be if I were to estimate what the real data might show if we had a study that showed this. I would estimate that somewhere between 70 and 80% of organizations probably skip the step and skip the logic that I just described as it relates to building a house. So in other words, what typically happens instead of thinking like how you would think logically about building a house, which you can see and touch and feel. So that's part of the problem here, is when you build something physically, you can see it and you can touch it. And it just makes more sense that there's a lot of design pieces that need to go into that. But when organizations go through transformations, I'd say 70, 80% of the time, they skip the step of planning, implementation readiness, and phase zero. And just to bring it back to the home building analogy, what they do instead of doing the proper planning, the phase zero, having that foundation, having that architecture in place early on before bringing in the technical implementers, what they do instead is they just jump right in, they pick a software and they jump right in and hire the software vendor and or the system integrator / technical implementer to start building technology. And to me, that's a lot like if going back to the home building analogy, if instead of doing what I described a moment ago, where you first hire an architect, then you hire a general contractor, then you hire the subcontractors, it'd be like saying that, I want a 2-story house that has a bathroom with running water. Let's just say that's a real high level. That's what I want. Two-story house, bathroom with running water. I'm not going to just go hire a plumber to come build the bathroom with running water within the house. But yet that's what most project teams and organizations intuitively want to do, is they want to just jump straight to the technology. They want to get straight to that one minute or that one work stream contractor within the overall project. And they focus myopically on that piece of it rather than all the other stuff that goes into quote unquote building the house. So that's one of the probably the best way I can describe why implementation planning in phase zero is so important, is because just like you wouldn't build a house by first going to a plumber, finding the best plumber, and then hiring the plumber, you would instead do all the other stuff I described. And I think that's the way we need to think about digital transformations. And I actually posted a graphic on my LinkedIn page that, and I apologize, I don't have it here in front of me, but it was actually a graphic of a house being built, and it was just being built really haphazard, and there's materials just scattered all over the place, and it's just a really messy home build. And I use that as a visual to describe how most organizations treat their digital transformations. And then they wonder why it fails. They wonder why the end product they get at the end of a project is not what they wanted. It took too much time, took too much money. And usually the root cause of that can be traced back to the fact that organizations did not spend enough time early on with the implementation, planning, and phase zero of a project. And that's the whole premise of what we're going to get into today, is discussing what exactly is phase zero, What are the different pieces of it? I'm going to walk through a framework that we use with our clients that helps them through this phase zero. And I'm going to describe this to you and actually show you some of the content that we review with our clients and some of the high level methodology that we walk through with our clients and help them with as well. So that's the context here. And just to build on this for a quick second, you think about projects that go over time and over budget. And intuitively we think, well, one way to make sure we don't go over time and over budget is get started now. Let's be aggressive. Let's go now. We've picked the software. Let's not worry about phase zero, because let's just say phase zero is going to take 2 to 3 months. I'm just throwing out an average number. For an average mid-sized company, it might take 2-3 months if you're going to do a proper full-blown implementation plan or phase zero. Now, a lot of executives might look at that and say, well, I could speed things up by 2 or 3 months if I skip phase zero. I can shave 2 or 3 months off the project. And the math, the logic doesn't work. It doesn't work that way, because if you do shave 2 or 3 months off of your phase zero and just go straight into the execution of implementation, yes, in the short term, you have indeed saved 2 or 3 months, but long term, you are going to spend exponentially more time and money trying to fix a bunch of problems. That's going to cost you a lot more than 2 or 3 months, and it's going to cost you a lot more money, and it's going to create a lot of chaos within the organization. And by the way, you're going to end up with an end product that is not aligned with what it is you need as a business. So that's sort of the human behavior and the human instincts that we have to overcome when we're managing digital transformations. And the more I do this, the more I find that there's just human flaws. There's like flaws in the way we think, and the flaws in our logic, and there's flaws in the urgency that we create for ourselves and the priorities we set for ourselves in these projects that is oftentimes, and more often than not, it's not aligned with what's going to make a project successful. So that's the way we've got to think about this. So I'm going to pull up a slide here, actually, because I'm a consultant. I can't have an educated conversation without pulling up a PowerPoint slide. But in all seriousness, usually in these podcast discussions, we just have a conversation with a guest. But I wanted to do things a little bit differently here today and really walk through this framework, because I think it's super important and something that just so often gets overlooked. But this is the slide I wanted to share with you today, or one of the slides. So this is digital strategy. So if we sort of back up and just say, we're talking about digital transformation, we're trying to create a digital strategy for ourselves and for our organization. These are the major components you would typically go through. You would have, starting at the top, working our way down, no particular order. By the way, a lot of this is happening in parallel, as you can see. Although I will say, putting it all on a pretty PowerPoint slide and making it look nice like this is different than the reality of how these project plans look. When you put it together in a plan format, it's not quite as sequential and pretty looking. But for visual purposes, we want to show you the major threads here so you can sort of see what the priorities are in the way we view implementation readiness. And here, if you look at this, I'm not going to walk through each of these slides or each of these boxes, but if you look through this visual, you can see that there's several different work streams that we tend to focus on, beginning with defining a digital strategy and then getting into the implementation readiness. So typically we would start with defining what is our strategy, what's the general roadmap for what we're going to do, and then we transition into the phase of implementation readiness, and then we get into the execution of implementation. That's typically the sequence of events. And if you skip those early stages, again, it's like building a house without having a general contractor, or without having a blueprint, without having a foundation laid for the building. It makes sense to us. We wouldn't skip those steps in building a house. And by the same token, when we look at building a digital transformation, we don't want to skip those steps either. We're here diving into phase zero and implementation planning, what it means and how to implement it in your organization. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation. with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
And I'll do anything you ever dreamed to be complete. Yes, I'm nothing that far.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian and Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. Thank you for being here today. And we are here chatting about implementation planning, phase zero, what it means and how to use that approach within your digital transformation. So the major steps here, the major threads you see are business process management, really defining what our current state is and what our future state is going to be. Now, here's where I want to talk about this for a second, because when we look at business process management, this is where a lot of organizations get stuck. And this is where they get tripped up over the whole chicken and the egg debate over whether business process improvement should happen before we select and implement technology or should it happen after. And the reality is it's a bit of both. But at a high level, at the macro level, you need to have that blueprint for how your processes are going to look in the future, regardless of what technology you're going to use. Now, yes, I understand, depending on what technology you choose, you might have different sub-processes and workflows down at the granular detailed level. That is true, but it doesn't dictate how you run your business, or it shouldn't dictate how you run your business. The way you run your business should be the way you want to run your business, regardless of whether you're using a modern cloud-based AI-enabled ERP system or whether you're using a pen and paper. You know, regardless of what technology or tools you do or don't have, there's certain things you want to be able to do as an organization to make yourself more effective. And of course, technology is going to enable that. And technology is going to give you tools to be able to do those things even better. But the fundamentals of what you do as a business doesn't really change just because you're putting in new technology. It's just the how you run your business, how you execute on those things, that does in fact change. So if you think about business processes in sort of 5 levels of detail, there's a nomenclature, if you haven't heard it, that's basically level 0 through level 5. Level 0 is really super high level macro processes. Level 5 is getting down into step-by-step procedures, step-by-step transactions, what fields you enter data into, what buttons you push, all that stuff. When you get down to level 5, yes, in fact, you do need to know what technology you're using, because you don't want to waste a lot of time designing something that's going to look a lot different in a new technology. But when you're talking about level 0, 1, and 2, sort of getting down to that mid-level of detail within process definition, that you can define, and you should define, independent of your technology. And then you stop. You don't want to go in the additional detail down to level 3, 4, 5 until you've started designing and deploying new technology. So think of it as an iterative process. You define your business processes to a certain point, enough to give you a blueprint of what you want your processes to look like. And then you figure out how technology is going to enable that. And then you define, as part of the technology design, you define the additional detail below that. So that's the approach we typically recommend for business process management. But you can see here already, we've only talked about one thread within this overall series of threads that we focus on during digital strategy and implementation readiness. And already you can see one area where organizations have a major hangup, and they say, well, let's not worry about business processes. Let's just go ahead and start implementing stuff, and the technology will tell us how we're going to run our business. And it's just it's a very flawed assumption. It's a dangerous assumption that unfortunately most software vendors, system integrators will feed into, and they'll say, yeah, do that. Just go ahead and choose what software you want. Let's get it out there. Let's start deploying it. And then that will determine what your processes are. And you have to remember the reason for that is because software vendors are trying to make a sale. They're trying to get you to buy their software and start implementing it as quickly as possible. So they're going to feed into this dynamic where we sort of skip over or have this tendency to want to skip over the overall readiness and phase 0 planning of the project. So that's process management. You also have organizational change management, where you get into the organizational assessment and really understanding the culture of the organization and defining a change strategy for how you're going to manage resistance to change. And this is really important because if you don't do this piece, if you don't do this organizational readiness piece up front, this organizational assessment, if you don't do that early on, you have no idea what you're up against organizationally. You have no idea how your people are going to respond to change. You have no idea where the pockets of resistance are going to be. You might think there's none out there. You might think there's not going to be resistance. Our people are pretty excited about new technology. On the surface, that might be true, but I can guarantee you, as you get into the details of change, organizations and team members are going to push back. They are going to resist in some way. It may not be full-on sabotage. It may not be coming from a bad place, but they will resist the change because it's a threat to the way they do things today. And there is going to be resistance, and there's going to be confusion. There's going to be difficulty adjusting to the change in some way, especially when you start talking about tools like AI and predictive analytics and things that are totally changing the way businesses work. And it's totally disrupting the way people operate and the way they're used to working. So that's another challenge, is that organizations don't recognize the need for change management until they're well into the project and start feeling the resistance to change, at which point it's too late. You need to get ahead of that and define what it's going to take to get your people to adapt to the change and make that part of your overall plan. Because if you don't know what your change strategy is, then you have no idea what your implementation timeline is going to look like. You just don't. You might think, well, the vendor told me it's going to take 18 months and they can deploy the technology in 18 months. That's not the question. That's not the answer we're looking for. The answer we're looking for is, how long is it going to take for our business to change using these new technologies? Implementing technology, sure, it might take 18 months, but us adapting to the technology and actually using this in our operations, it could take 24 months or 36 months or whatever the number is. We don't know until we know what the resistance to change is going to look like and we know what our change strategy is. More often than not, the change management thread or the work stream is on the critical path. In other words, the problem and the speed at which the problems we face in a project and the speed at which we implement new technology is not going to be driven by the technology vendor or the technology itself. It's going to be driven by our business and how quickly we do or don't adapt to change. And change just doesn't happen overnight just because our software vendor can build software fast. It happens at our pace, whoever, depending on who we are culturally. You know, if we have a history of rapid change, then that's one thing. But if we have a history of not managing change well, or if we're a really well-established company that's been around for 100+ years and we have a highly tenured workforce, change is going to take probably a lot longer than it's going to take your vendor to build new technology for your organization. So you need that change management piece laid out early on to be able to fully understand what your timeline is going to look like and what the risk is going to be for the project. And then you've got enterprise applications. So we need to plan out, what are our systems that we're deploying? How are we going to integrate the systems? How's the data going to be migrated? Where's the data going to be housed? How are we going to handle interim integration points between some of the legacy solutions? Which legacy solutions are going to stay, which are going to go? Of the ones that are going to go, when are they going to go? How are we going to time that? How are we going to decommission these legacy systems? So there's a lot of architecture and technical type stuff that needs to be addressed in these next two streams that you see here with enterprise applications and solution architecture. So we've got to figure those technical pieces out well beyond just understanding what the core solution is that we're implementing. And again, we don't want to look at it in a myopic view of how long will it take us to build the new technology. We have to be thinking about, okay, it's going to take us this long to build the new technology, but how long is it going to take us to, on top of that, clean up the data, migrate the data, and build these integration points and decommission old systems? What's our plan for which systems are going to stay, which are going to go? A lot of times what happens is organizations end up making these decisions in the heat of battle when they're in the middle of the implementation and decisions are moving quickly, or they should be moving quickly. And what happens is the project ends up slowing down. It faces all these headwinds organizationally because the organization's trying to figure out these answers to these questions that if you would have taken the time up front during phase 0 implementation planning, you would have saved yourself a lot of time and heartache and money. And the project would be going a lot faster and a lot more smoothly if you just define that stuff up front. It also creates a morale issue too when organizations can't make decisions fast enough and it causes delays to the project. Now you create this sociological problem and an organizational behavior problem where people start to question the validity of the project. They start thinking, well, is this really going to work? This is sort of a mess. I mean, we can't seem to make decisions. We're already behind schedule. Vendors telling us one thing, but we're over here trying to make decisions. And what's even worse is when you can't make a decision fast enough and the software vendor makes the decision for you. They say, well, we've got to make a decision because we've got a deadline we've got to hit. So we're just going to make the decision for you. And it's sort of like guessing. It usually doesn't go well. And you can't assume that a software vendor is going to guess correctly on what your business should look like. So those are the first 4 threads. We talked about process management, change management, enterprise apps, solution architecture. And then the last major work stream is business intelligence and analytics. Really understanding what is the output, what's the back end of the system going to look like in terms of what we see, what information do we have, what analytics do we have, how are we going to gather and understand the information that's actually being housed and managed within the system. Those are all some of the things that are really important to get to. So I want to get to some of the questions. We're getting a lot of comments here from my earlier question of what has your experience been with phase 0 in implementation planning? Have you done it before? Have you seen it work? Have you seen it when it's skipped before? What's the outcome been when an organization has skipped it? So that was my general question. I got a lot of comments here that I want to get to here today. This is from Richard on LinkedIn. Richard says, absolutely vital to do a phase 0, Eric. Sets the foundation for the entire project. So thank you for that. And then James on LinkedIn agrees with Richard. So you have others, not just me, they're agreeing with you, Richard. Yep. And a few of you answered the question that you can, in fact, see my screen. That's great because I was just talking for a long time and it would have been super awkward if you weren't seeing my screen that entire time. Here's an interesting comment. This is from a vendor point of view, and I find this really interesting. This is from Andrew on YouTube. Andrew says, we have an integrated cloud platform for manufacturing in the sheet metal industry. The biggest failures come when there has not been a detailed analysis of the as is versus the to be. Really well said. I totally agree with that. And I want to unpack that a little bit here because a lot of times another common challenge that we hear, and this is interesting coming from a software vendor. I'll be honest. I don't hear software vendors say what Andrew just said here. I don't hear that very often. What I typically hear from software vendors is the opposite of what Andrew just said. Usually what software vendors will say is that you don't need to worry about the as is. Your as is going away. Why even bother documenting it? Why bother analyzing or understanding it? And on the surface, that's another sort of thing where, like, if you tell me that, that kind of makes sense. Like, yeah, why bother? Why worry too much about the as is? It's going to change, right? We want to focus on the future state, the to be. There's some truth to that, but there's also some flawed assumptions there. The flawed assumption being that we don't need to know what the current state is. And that's a hugely flawed assumption for a couple of reasons. One is because there's probably a lot of good things you're doing in your current state model that you want to keep. I know everyone wants to think of digital transformation as this big, massive overhaul where we're just going to throw out everything we've ever done and we're going to rethink our entire business and we're going to put in new technology and we're just going to look totally different on the other side. That state of utopia is not realistic. It rarely happens, but what does happen is a more incremental improvement to the business. And you have to think, if your business has been around for any amount of time, you probably have things you're doing really well. You probably have some things that are completely broken, that need to be automated, that could be done a lot better, of course. But there's probably a lot of things you're doing really well. So let's figure out what those things are. What are those things that we do differently that are better than what our competition does? What are those things that we do really well, where it's a strength of ours and we want to preserve that and build on it? That's great. Let's focus on those things. We don't necessarily need to worry about the as is for things that are not differentiators for us or they're not competitive advantages or whatever the case may be. But we do want to focus on certain parts of our as is model because those things need to carry over into the future state in many cases. And then, of course, the second reason why the as is so important is because that's what people understand within your organization today. We as leaders might be thinking more to the future. That's great. We got it. We have to do that. But people within the organization, the employees, are thinking about current state. They're looking at how things work today, and they're looking at what they understand, their world today. And that's really important to them. If we disregard it and say we're going to skip the as is, it doesn't matter, you've automatically created resistance to change within your organization. People will resist that approach because they're going to say, well, what about this awesome complex spreadsheet that I created 10 years ago to manage my entire process, and only I know how to use this spreadsheet. You're telling me that doesn't matter? And you're telling me you're not even going to consider that as part of our design of the new future state? Right there, you've created resistance to change. No, I don't care how good of a person that is or how well-intended that person is, they will resist the change because you are dismissing the value that that person brings to the organization. Now, of course, that spreadsheet still might go away. That person's business processes and responsibilities might completely change. I'm not saying you just have to leave things the way they are because you might upset people, but you do need to understand the way things are today, because that's what people within the organization understand. So there's a psychological component of it, but there's also just tactically, from an execution perspective, we have to understand where people are starting from today and where they're going to be and what the magnitude of change is for individuals within the organization. We have to understand that if we're going to manage change effectively. And getting back to that change management work stream, that's a super important work stream, as you see on the screen here. That's one of the really important ones. We're here diving into phase 0 and implementation planning, what it means and how to implement it in your organization. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian and Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. Thank you for being here today. And we are here chatting about implementation planning, phase 0, what it means and how to use that approach within your digital transformation. Here's another interesting perspective from James on LinkedIn here. And James says, phase 0 is readily skipped at the start, but various facets dripped in as they move forward. It's not seen as required due to the out-of-the-box sales technique, and the house analogy is a flat pack build. All the parts are there, just decide which pieces to bolt together. Well said. I like how you're tying it back to the house building analogy here too. and that is true. A lot of times, software vendors love to sell this concept of, off the shelf, out of the box software. They really love to sell the concept of pre-configured best practices. Don't worry about defining your future state. Our software has best practices built into it. First of all, I can't think of a more arrogant comment or sales message than saying that our software is best practice, because that it's misleading, it's arrogant. There's so many problems with that comment or that statement around best practices, but yet we've built an entire industry around that concept, and it creates blind spots and flawed assumptions for companies going through projects. And quite frankly, it's dangerous. I mean, it creates a lot of danger and risk for organizations when they think that they can just take these pieces out of a box and bolt them together. As James says, you wouldn't build a house that way. Why are you going to build your organization that way? How are you going to build your organization that way? So that's really well said. James, thank you for that. A lot of great comments here. Thank you for all the feedback. It makes it a lot less cumbersome when not having a guest, when I have many guests here in the audience that I can be chatting with. So thank you for that. This is another well said comment from Andy on LinkedIn. Andy says, if you don't know where you're at, how are you going to define the best path and direction forward? Need to know. It's very well said. I agree with you there. Thank you for that. Here's an interesting comment and question from Syed on LinkedIn. Phase 0 is crucial, but how can we control continuous improvements in business, which follow Six Sigma and lean methodologies? And at one point of time, the business processes are completely different than what they used to be. This is an interesting point. I'll try to answer it in the way I think you're asking it, but tell me if I'm off or not answering it the way you mean here. But I do agree that phase 0 is crucial. And the question is, how can we control continuous improvements in businesses that are following Lean Six Sigma or Six Sigma lean methodologies, and the business is changing? What I would say is, if you're a Lean Six Sigma shop or a Six Sigma shop or a lean shop or a TQM shop, whatever your mindset is, whatever your philosophy is as it relates to business and operations and continuous improvement, whatever your mindset and philosophy is, go with that. I mean, keep that, let that drive your transformation, because the way I view this is it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter if Six Sigma is the right answer or not. The fact that you have a philosophy around Six Sigma and lean, that should be your starting point. That should be how you approach these projects. And that's consistent with who you are as a business. It's consistent with your culture. It may not be consistent with what your software vendor wants you to do or what they would consider best practice. But if it's what you do and what works for your organization, then do it. Let that drive and dictate to the software vendors how they're going to fit into the picture, rather than them telling you how you're going to run your business. So I would say keep doing that as part of your philosophy. And if anything, if you're a lean or a Six Sigma shop, you're probably going to want more than most organizations. You're going to want this phase 0, because you're going to want to define what your future state is and what your process improvements are going to be. And you're going to focus on metrics and measures as it relates to the project. And quite frankly, I think you're probably going to have a higher likelihood of success if you lead with a heavy dose of Lean Six Sigma and let that be the guiding light or the kind of the core tenets of your philosophy there. Interesting comment from Richard on LinkedIn. Too much change in one can go cripple a business too and overwhelm people. So yes, too much change can be a bad thing. And guess what? Too much change is not, even if you could do it well, doesn't mean it's a good thing. I mean, I think a lot of times we in this industry, and when I say we, because we're not, Third Stage is not a software vendor. We're not affiliated with software vendors. We're independent consultants, but just we as an industry. If you look at our entire industry, we have this mindset that transformation, big, massive change is a good thing. And it's not always a good thing. I mean, it might be in theory, but the reality of running your business and managing risk and managing our ROI may point to a more incremental, lower cost sort of solution. And that's okay. I don't know where we got lost in this industry about judging businesses on how much they're willing to change or not. If a business doesn't want to change a lot, then don't force it. I mean, you can challenge yourself and build muscles to become more agile and become more change friendly and all that good stuff, of course. But if it doesn't mean you necessarily need to rip out all your systems today and go with AI and cloud solutions and invest all this money in new technologies if your business is just going to reject it. You know, if the organism that is your business is going to reject that much change, then don't do it. So I think that's, it's okay. I just want to say that a lot of organizations tend to think that they hear all this messaging in the industry that if we're not deploying AI right now, that we're going to die. We're going to be out of business in 5 years. That's absolutely not true. If I'm trying to sell you AI software, I might tell you that because I want you to buy my software and I want you to think that you have to have it. You can't live without my software. But being independent, I have nothing to gain by you buying software or not. So I would just say do what makes sense for your organization. And that's why digital strategy and implementation planning is so important, because so much of it is focused on alignment and so much of it is focused on getting the organization, to understand what the project is for this particular business and how it's going to fit into our culture and how it's going to allow us to be more successful as an organization and as a project team. So actually, this is a good segue into another visual I want to show you, which looks similar to the previous slide. You see the 5 work streams on the left side are very similar to what I just showed you with some slight changes here. We have the operational readiness. I'm going to skip the first one for a second. I'm going to come back to that. The second box or the second row you see is operational readiness. That's really that whole business process improvement piece that I talked about, the business process management piece that I talked about on the digital strategy piece. And then you've got people readiness, which is the organizational change piece of it. And then the technical readiness, which is all the integration, architecture, data, all that piece that we talked about. And the reason I'm showing you this is an example from a client that we did a couple of years ago. And this is actually diving deeper into that digital strategy slide I just showed you. Now we're diving deeper into the things we're going to do during the implementation readiness phase. So now we're actually unpacking and getting into the detailed planning of how we can actually execute and plan for the execution on these different work streams that I showed you on the previous slide. So those are the main, the threads that I chatted about on the previous slide. This just gives you more detail as it relates to the people, process, and technology aspects of the implementation planning. But the one that I skipped is arguably the most important, and that's the first row at the top of this slide. You see strategic and executive alignment. And this is where you really need to make sure that your implementation plan and the plan that you're going to execute to fits your business, and not just the business you're trying to become, but also the business you are today. Who are you culturally? Let me back up and just give you an example. When we talk about strategic and executive alignment, a lot of times people think, well, we've got alignment because the executive team agreed that we're going to do this project, and they agreed that they're going to sign the checks, and they agreed that they'll do monthly status meetings. So therefore we have executive alignment. That's not what executive alignment means. That's one small piece of it. But what executive alignment really means is making sure that there's alignment between what the executives want from the business and the strategy of the business, the objectives of the business. We want to make sure that piece is in sync with the overall digital strategy and the implementation plan that we're developing for that digital strategy execution. So in other words, let's just use an example here. Let's just say that a business decides that their stated objective is to standardize their operations. They are acting like multiple disparate companies right now. They've grown through acquisitions. They've entered new markets, and over time they find that they have a bunch of different ways of operating that are very inconsistent, and in many cases in conflict with one another. So part of the digital transformation, part of the strategy is to standardize operations. Now, there might be some within the organization that think that's a bad idea. They might think, well, I don't want to standardize operations. The way we operate over here in my business unit, that's the right way. That is the way we need to continue operating. If you have that, and it's very common to have that, by the way, you aren't aligned at the executive level. You've got to work through that, because if that person continues to think that standardization is not the right way to go, when you get into the implementation, if you jump right into the implementation, that person is going to slow that project down, not intentionally, but the fact that that person is not aligned, they're not on the same page in this example, that's going to create problems. And so you've got to be prepared for that. And that's where a lot of organizations don't understand the importance of that alignment. The other way that phase 0 and implementation planning is so important to just the overall alignment is also alignment around who we are as a business. So, let me give you 2 examples. I've got 2 businesses that are, let's just say they're both, $500 million companies. They do $500 million in revenue or annual turnover per year. So similar sized companies, let's just say they're manufacturing companies. They're same industry. Let's just say they're competitors. They're the same industry. They're competitors. On the surface, they look like the same company. They're $500 million in revenue, manufacturing, a couple thousand employees, whatever it is. One of those companies is a younger company. It's a newer company. It's grown fast. It hasn't been around as long as the other company. They've managed a bunch of change initiatives over the years, and they've gone through a lot of change. They've got a pretty young workforce, not very highly tenured. The other manufacturing company is different. They've been around for 100 plus years, highly tenured staff. Average staff is 30 years, let's just say. Very mature business processes, older tools that they've been using, homegrown system. Those are two very different scenarios. Those two companies on the surface look like the same company. They're competitors, same size, same industry, but you're going to have two very different digital strategies. You're going to have two very different implementation plans that you want to develop for these two companies. The one that has a highly tenured staff, I can assure you, the more mature company, the company that's been around for longer, that has the homegrown system, that has highly tenured employees, I can almost guarantee you that company is just going to take longer to go through their transformation than the other company. Or they're going to go through more incremental change. The change they go through and the way their transformation looks on the other side is going to be less of a change. It's going to be more incremental than the other company, which is probably going to have more of a tolerance and an appetite for bigger change. And these are broad generalizations. I'm just giving you two contrasting examples to show you that you can have two companies that look the same. They're implementing the same technology. Let's just say they both picked a tier 1 ERP system. The two companies are still going to have two very different plans, two very different strategies, and they're just going to look totally different. And that's okay. That's what you've got to figure out. That is also part of what we mean by strategic alignment. You have to have a plan that's aligned with who you are as a business and also who you're trying to become. You can't come in and force fit a best practice methodology or a canned boilerplate implementation plan that a software vendor used at their previous customer. It's not going to work for you because you have different cultures, you have different priorities, you're trying to accomplish different things as a business, you have different personalities in the organization. And that's part of what alignment is really getting that stuff out on the surface and really understanding what that should look like. We're here diving into phase 0 and implementation planning, what it means and how to implement it in your organization. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting, and I want to invite you to join our annual tech agnostic conference called Digital Stratosphere. Digital Stratosphere is a conference that features some of the industry's brightest minds, greatest thinkers, and it's a great opportunity to network with peers, other industry people, other CIOs, other project team members that are going through digital transformations or ERP implementations. We've got a great lineup of speakers this year. It's a 3-day event, a lot of great entertainment, networking opportunities. I'll be there as one of the keynote speakers, along with some of my favorite speakers in the industry as well, both within Third Stage Consulting, but also outside the company as well. So I encourage you to check it out and learn more. You can go to stratosphere2024.com to learn more about the event. You can see the agenda, the way it's shaping up, and you can see some of the past testimonials of people that have attended. And the event is October 2nd through the 4th, 2024. It's going to be based in Denver, Colorado, downtown Denver, beautiful downtown Denver in the fall, which is a great time to visit Denver if you haven't been. Again, stratosphere2024.com. Check out the agenda. Check out our early bird pricing for passes. And the other beautiful things, if you can't be here in person in Denver, which we hope you can, but if you can't, you can also join remotely as well. We have virtual passes available as well, so you're able to join from wherever in the world you might want to join from. So stratosphere2024.com, check it out, and I hope to see you there.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian and Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. Thank you for being here today. And we are here chatting about implementation planning, phase 0, what it means and how to use that approach within your digital transformation. So here's a question getting into back to the audience here. This is from Russ on LinkedIn. Russ asked the question, what do you think about phase zero pricing? I often want to do it at cost or with slight profit to ensure all parties are on board and understand what the effort requires and the actual desired outcomes. I can't really tell you how to price it, whether you want to use it as a loss leader or whatever the case may be. That's more of a business decision that you would have to make. But as far as, maybe I'll talk more about how long it takes and where you should focus. I think, if you're selling software, I will say that it's going to be difficult to sell this service because, you're probably going to have internal pressure to get the software sale done, and you're going to have internal pressure to get the technical resources staffed on the project as soon as possible. So that's just the economic self-interest reality that software vendors face. And that's why they more often than not will tell a customer not to worry about implementation planning or phase zero, and instead just say, hey, let's just jump into it and get straight to it. So, but what I would say is when we're doing implementation readiness phase zero for clients, it usually takes us somewhere between 3 and 6 months. And usually that's a comfortable pace for most organizations. Now, of course, you could spend a year or two on implementation planning, but you get a point of diminishing returns. You start to lose momentum on the project. A lot of times you just don't have the time, available. You have more urgency than that. So 3 to 6 months, depending on the size and scope of the project, tends to feel, average to us. If you look at a bell curve of our clients, it's usually 3 to 6 months. So those are some of that's just my experience. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that seems to work for most of our clients, especially in the mid-market and the upper mid-market as well. Here's a question on YouTube from Vast CNC is the handle name or the username. Is there a market for a dedicated universal pre-implementation to assess current state and business processes before vendor involvement? A dedicated phase zero team? Yes. Typically what we do, so when clients hire us, oftentimes it's to help them define what their digital strategy and roadmap is at a high level. And then the second phase that they'll hire us to help with is this implementation planning in phase zero. And so in that implementation planning in phase zero, this is the tricky part, is you've got to hold off. You've got to you've got to hold the wolves at bay, the software vendor. And the reason I say that is not because software vendors are bad people or not because the technical implementation consultants are bad people, but because you don't want the meter to start running right away. You don't want them to send their army of consultants to come into your organization and just start designing and building stuff. You're not ready for it until you've been through phase zero. And so, yes, I'd say a small SWAT team, very small team that's dedicated to phase zero, focus on phase zero before your technical implementation partner gets involved is important. There are times where we will have a very limited subset of the technical implementation partner or the technical experts that understand the technology or technologies that are being deployed. We might have a small subset of those people involved that keep parts of this phase zero planning, but that's more of as an input into the overall process. We aren't asking those technical implementation partners to drive the process for us. And that's what you have to be careful of. You don't want the vendor or the technical implementer people to drive this phase zero, because they think of it more from the perspective of, how do I design and build the software? Whereas you as a business should be thinking about, how do I design and build my future organization? What am I going to look like when I get at the other side of this? And those are two different answers, or two different questions you're trying to answer. Software vendor, technical implementers will provide one of many inputs into what the overall plan is. The problem is, if you rely on your software vendor and your technical implementation partner to do that for you, they're going to have this narrow, myopic view. In fact, if we look at this slide up here, they're going to focus primarily on that second to last box that covers the technical readiness piece of it. They're not going to be focused on business process improvement and the organizational change side of it. They're not going to be focused on the alignment with your overall business. Those are all things that you need someone who's objective and tech agnostic. A company like Third Stage, and yes, this is a shameless self-promotion for my company, which is Third Stage Consulting. Companies like ours can provide that sort of objective agnostic view of how your implementation should work. And of course, you need to collaborate with the technical implementer to provide that input that they have, but you also have other stakeholders you're going to involve as well, not just the technical piece of it. There's a question. I don't know that I have a good answer for it. This is from LinkedIn. I don't see the name of the person here, so apologies for that. It says, Eric, can we sometimes go too far with the efficiency lean approaches? Yes, we can actually. I think that any any approach or mindset you can take too far, and I think businesses do it very often. So just like any school of thought or philosophy, you can in fact take it too far. So I would agree with that. It's all about moderation, just like sugar or other things that are unhealthy for you. You can have a little bit of it, but once you have too much, it starts to become a problem. Here's another comment from Amit on LinkedIn. Amit says the phase 0 is all about people and process, which might take longer than planned, but is worth it for digital transformations. Well said. I agree with you there. And then a follow-up here from Amit on LinkedIn. He says, methodologies are for streamlining the process and aligning the people. Of course, yes, I agree. This is from Sabahat on LinkedIn. Sabahat says, implementation readiness is the most critical aspect of digital transformation. I think I agree with you on this. Yes, I would agree with you. And I'm not questioning whether or not it's a good comment. It's a great comment. I'm just trying to think, is this the most important thing you can do on a project? You can always make arguments for, there's other things I could probably argue might be just as important. But I think if you look at implementation readiness in phase 0, it really strikes at and tackles the root cause of what causes most implementation failures and most implementation problems. In my just qualitative research with our team over the years, I've sort of boiled it down to 2 root causes of why projects fail. One is unrealistic expectations, just not understanding what it's going to take to do what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then the second is organizational change management or change resistance. And phase 0 and implementation planning really tackles and addresses both of them. They don't make the problems go away. They don't completely eliminate the risk, but they at least address the problems that are created by those 2 things, unrealistic expectations and change resistance or change management issues. So phase 0, it really tackles and addresses the root cause of both of those. I would tend to agree that if you do phase 0, you're going to have more realistic understanding of what your plan is really going to entail in terms of time and resources and money and all that stuff and scope. And it's also going to address the change management piece of it by developing a very prescriptive change strategy that you've developed by doing an organizational assessment and understanding where the change resistance is going to be as part of your planning process. You don't want to get into a implementation and halfway through the implementation really start to understand what the change issues are going to be and what the resistance to change is going to look like. You should know that stuff up front, and there's ways to do that without waiting until you experience it. Because again, if you wait till you experience it, then that derails the project. So I would say that this comment is spot on. And even if I look outside my own experience and research, so I mentioned that my experience and sort of the way I've boiled it down over the years is to those 2 things. Unrealistic expectations and change management issues. Those are the 2 root causes of failure, in my opinion. However, I recently met with and got to know a professor based out of Belgium who does research around digital transformations, ERP projects. His name is Hans Mulder, and I did an interview with him on my podcast. If you search, if you just go to my YouTube channel and search Eric Kimmerling, Hans Mulder, Mulder. You'll see this interview, and he has all this research he's done over the years of what causes failure. His quantitative research is not inconsistent with mine, but it adds another layer. And so I'd give you a 3rd root cause of why projects fail. And I don't remember the exact number. He does cite it in the podcast interview where I interview him, but he cites a number that I believe is in the 90 plus percentage point range, which is 90% or more of delays and problems with projects are caused by what he calls decision latency. So in other words, companies and teams can't make decisions fast enough to keep up with the project. And so because the decision-making is slowed down, it pushes the entire project out. You think about a software vendor and a statement of work where they say, hey, we're going to bring you the design phase and you as the customer are going to sign off on it. If they assume it's going to take you 3 days to sign off on it, but it takes you 3 weeks, you've just delayed the project almost 3 weeks. And that's just one example. You add that up over time to a bunch of decisions that get slowed down and it pushes things out. That's how the project gets delayed. And what's even worse is the budget gets out of control because the meter keeps running. You've got all these resources that are sitting idle, but you're paying them to be on the project. And that's how the budget gets so far out of control. So he talks about decision latency being the primary driver for project delays and project overruns. And phase zero, so if you take his data point and add that as a third really core root cause reason for failure, you can see how phase zero and implementation planning could help that, because now you're moving all the decisions up front and you're compressing that decision making into a dedicated phase of the project where you've made most of the major decisions you're going to have to make. And it gets back to that alignment piece that you see on the slide here, that the very first row of activities, that strategic and executive alignment becomes really important. And part of it is getting these decisions around what we want to be when we grow up. What do we want our future state to be? How much do we want to standardize? Where are we willing to let different parts of the organization be independent or decentralized? Those decisions, it's much better to make in isolation up front before you have an army of people that are billing you by the hour waiting for you to make these decisions. If you can make all those decisions up front before the meter starts running, you've just saved yourself a ton of time and a ton of money, and it's going to exponentially make up for it later in the project. So I do agree that implementation readiness is the most critical aspect of digital transformation. So thank you for that comment. Another vendor comment. I love I love the vendor perspectives here today, because it's always interesting to hear, first of all, but second of all, quite frankly, these comments are different than what I would expect to hear and what I typically do hear from the vendor community. But this is from Richard on LinkedIn. Richard says, we discuss phase zero during pre-sales and make sure the customer understands the value of it. All of our customers are happy to pay for it. And chances are, I don't know if you use this as a selling point, they might be paying for it. You might be, on paper at least, asking them to pay something more incremental to what they would pay anyway. But I would say they're actually paying you less, because they might pay some money up front to do this phase zero stuff, but they're going to save a lot of money and time later. So you could actually sell it as something that you're actually saving them money. You're not asking them to pay for anything. You're just asking them to be smart and spend the money smartly and spend it at the right time. That's if you want some unsolicited sales advice. I'm not a salesperson, so you take it for what it's worth. So great comments and questions here. I'm going to get back to the audience comments here in a minute, even because there's a lot I haven't gotten to, but I do want to show you another slide, one more slide here. And actually we have a ton of detail that runs behind this as well, but this is sort of a summary view of what our typical implementation readiness plan looks like. I'm going to leave this up on the screen as we continue the conversation here, so you can sort of look at it and digest it. If you want to copy this, just email me or message me after the discussion here today. I'm happy to share it with you. But this framework here sort of shows those major work streams that I just discussed on the previous couple slides that I showed you. But now we're breaking it up into the actual tactical execution of what happens or should happen during implementation readiness in phase zero. So you can see all these, the 5 work streams, what are the things that are happening here. And this is what I mentioned before is typically the 3 to 6 month duration that we see, where if you do it right and you spend the time getting this done right, you're going to spend about 3 to 6 months focused on this piece of it. And you can see all the different activities and sequences of events. Again, it's not quite as sequential and pretty as a PowerPoint slide might suggest. There's a lot more detail behind this, but these are the major activities and things that would happen during a project like this. I'll let you digest that while I continue getting into some more questions here. We're here diving into phase zero and implementation planning, what it means and how to implement it in your organization. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian and Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. Thank you for being here today. And we are here chatting about implementation planning, phase zero, what it means, and how to use that approach within your digital transformation. Another comment from, this is from Russ, and Russ is responding to another comment on LinkedIn here. Russ says, should always be a post-mortem activity. In my opinion, you want to focus on the planned efforts and results, then layer in any changes in their effect on effort and results, creating a delta, add that to your baseline, then measure your new baseline with actuals. I would also do interviews. So I think that's in response to the, so let me back up for a second. I apologize. First, the original question was from Sabahat on LinkedIn. Sabahat says, how can we measure the effectiveness of our implementation readiness strategy? And then Russ answers that question, or gives his response, which is, in my opinion, you want to focus on the planned effort and results, then layer in any changes, their effect on effort and results, creating a delta, add that to your baseline, then measure a new baseline with actuals. I would also do interviews. I agree with that. I think that's a great way to look at it. And I would say, it's hard to measure implementation readiness effectiveness, because I think the true measure comes after the implementation. And unfortunately, the true measure comes from comparing what you actually did versus what it would have looked like if you hadn't done the implementation readiness. So in many cases, it's somewhat of a conceptual, hypothetical comparison. But what I will say is, if you have enough experience and you've been through this enough times, you've probably been through situations where you didn't do implementation planning in phase zero. You saw how that domino effect impacted the rest of the project, and you saw what that timeline looked like. And then if you go on to another project and you actually do implementation readiness and you see how that affected the overall implementation, you start to see like, wow, those were two very different outcomes. And those are two very different results that I got by doing two very different things early on to start the project. And unfortunately, that just comes with experience. Now, there are people like the professor I mentioned a moment ago. There's people like that are out there in academia and other parts of the world just studying this stuff quantitatively, and his data and his research supports the fact that phase zero is important. But if you truly want to measure the effectiveness for you individually as an organization, unfortunately, the only real way to do it would be to compare what things look like when you do implementation readiness and phase zero planning with what it looks like when you don't do it. And you can't run two parallel tests, unfortunately. So you sort of have to base it on experience. But again, what I can tell you is, just having done it so many times, and I've done it both ways. I've seen a lot of companies skip over phase zero. I've seen a lot of companies that spend a lot of time on phase zero. And I can tell you without a doubt, the ones that spend time on phase zero have a much higher success rate than the ones that don't. And so, that experience set, I think, is real important to understand and see how that's affected there. Here's an interesting question that I don't think I've been asked before. This is from Dennis on YouTube. Dennis says, usually executives keep big projects semi-secret up until the end. In other words, when the software provider contract is signed. Stage 0 is probably already too late at this point. How do you deal with this issue? It's a great question. First of all, I challenge the assumption that executives should be keeping this secret until the very end. If they are doing that, that's a problem. That's a whole nother problem, whole nother topic for another conversation or another podcast topic. But because you do want to involve people, it doesn't necessarily need to be a complete democracy or a completely unanimous decision, but you do want to involve key stakeholders and key decision makers, at the very least a core project team that represents a cross swath of your business. If you're not doing that, you're going to run into all kinds of other problems related to change management, alignment issues, et cetera, that even a phase 0 is probably not going to completely fix. So that's you're sort of getting into a more fundamental problem that organizations oftentimes run into. But the dynamic of when the software provider contract is signed, and that being the too late, the point of no return. Yes and no. I mean, you might sign this, let's just say your executive team has a secret plan and they go off behind closed doors and they choose SAP or Microsoft or Oracle, whatever the product is. They pick a software vendor and they sign the contract, multi-million-dollar contract, and then they announce it and say, guess what, guys, we're implementing whatever the technology is. Even if you do that, you still have time, and you should say, hey, okay, great. I guess that's the direction we're going, but hold on. We don't need to buy, 10,000 subscriptions right now to the software. We don't need to start paying on the cloud subscriptions right now because we're not going to be using it anytime soon because we still have to go through the implementation. So you don't want to overcommit the spend on subscriptions. You also don't want to overcommit on bringing in the technical consultants right away if you haven't taken the time to do all the stuff we're talking about here today and all the stuff you see on the screen in front of you. So, the way to overcome it, honestly, is to first and foremost, educate your executive team. I mean, I hope there's some C-level people that are going through implementations that are listening right now to this conversation because they need to hear this more than anyone. Because they're the ones that have to set the tone and the overall direction and the vision for the project. And they're the ones that have to define what it is that the project's going to look like. And unfortunately, software vendors are very good at communicating with executive levels, and they're very good at telling executives what they want to hear, which is sort of that easy button phenomena where it's like, hey, this phase 0 stuff that third stage and Eric Kimberling are talking about, don't even worry about it. Don't need to worry about it. Our software has best practices. We have best-in-class methodologies to deploy our technology. We can do this in 12 months. Let's just get started tomorrow. Let's go ahead and sign the contract. That's, I'm generalizing and oversimplifying the sales process of sales vendors, but that is very common. That's sort of the way that these sales cycles go with executives. So the key is, how do you counter that messaging that they get from software vendors, that stuff that sounds too good to be true, that state of utopia that every executive wants and expects for their organization? How do you counter that with a dose of reality, which may not be what the executives want to hear? They like the other answer better because it sounds better. And I understand that. So, but the key is, how do you educate them and provide it in bite-sized chunks for an executive who's not willing to listen to a 1-hour discussion like this one on implementation readiness? Now, I would argue, any executive that's going through a big, massive, multi-million-dollar transformation should take the time to educate themselves. They should take the time to listen in on sessions like this, because you're about to make a huge decision, not just financially, but also something that affects other resources within your organization, and it materially affects the risk profile of your organization as well. So I would argue that every executive involved in a transformation should be part of this conversation. So one thing I would do is I would share this conversation. I would actually take this link and share it with an executive team that's going through a transformation. Or if you want, go to my YouTube channel and search. I have a lot of 10-minute-ish sorts of videos that are a lot more crisp. They're more focused, that will get the message across in maybe a more digestible way to executives. In fact, I just posted a video recently, this week, in fact, as we're recording this week, a video on my YouTube channel. I think it's the most recent video that came out on my YouTube channel. Actually, it's about what executive sponsors should do, what's their role, and what should they expect in a digital transformation, and how should they be involved in a digital transformation. It's about a 10 or 12-minute video. Share that one with your executive team, and it summarizes some of what we're talking about here today at a very, strategic high level, but it at least get some of these main points across. So that's another way you could tackle it as well. Charlene on YouTube is asking for a copy of the implementation readiness plan. I'm happy to share it. Just ping me on LinkedIn if you don't mind, or message me on, well, I guess you are on YouTube. You just messaged me on YouTube by me seeing this comment, but I won't see it again unless it's in my inbox. So if you could find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a note on there, I'll be happy to send you that link there. And I'll get to a couple questions here, and then we'll sort of wrap it up. I really appreciate all the great comments here. There's some really good questions and comments here. Another comment from Dennis on YouTube. If you do know why and how you're doing a process, you haven't optimized anything enterprise wide. Stage 0 is a project in itself in this case. I think what he meant to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he meant to say if you do not know why and how you're doing a process, you haven't optimized anything enterprise wide. And that's something we always do during phase 0 too, is why are we doing things that way? Is it really because we really are and should be different, or is it because we're different just because that's just the way we've always done it and there's no real good reason other than that? And you have to sort of distinguish between the two, because sometimes, individual employees will tell you when you're redefining or redesigning a business process, they'll tell you like, well, we can't really do it that way. And you'll say, well, why? Why can't we do it that way? Well, because it just doesn't work. Customers want this or that, or this is the way we track stuff now, and we need to continue doing that in the future. And if you keep asking why, you're going to find some cases where, yeah, okay, it makes sense. We should keep doing things that way, or we should be different in that way. But a lot of times you find that, yeah, we're different. We're doing things differently, and no one can really tell you why. They just, I don't know. That's just the way I got trained 20 years ago. And that's the way I've been told to do it for 20 years. And that's why we do things the way we do it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. It just means you've got some organizational, not baggage necessarily, but you've got some organizational past that's just baked into your way of operating. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad or right or wrong. And so you have to use this as an opportunity to rethink how you do business and make sure that you understand, the reasons for why you're doing what you are, and that you're challenging things too. Is there a better way we could be doing that? Is there a way we could use technology more effectively? All that good stuff. So I want to thank you guys for a great conversation. Really appreciate your time here today, and appreciate all your great comments and questions. I could keep going for another hour or two. Maybe someday we'll do a deeper dive masterclass session on this topic. But really hope you enjoyed the conversation. I've got a lot more detail behind this too. So there's actually, for each of the major work streams that we talked about, I've got a lot more detail behind it that sort of unpacks each of the work streams and all the deliverables and outputs and steps in the process. So if you'd like to see any of that, just message me on LinkedIn, or I'll drop in the chat my, actually, I'll just put it up on the screen while we're talking here. I will put my email address here so you can have it here. Bear with me. I'm really bad at multitasking, so doing something like this is super challenging for me, talking and typing at the same time. But I've got my email address here on the screen. It's Eric, ERIC, at thirdstage, THIRDSTAGE -consulting.com. Just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to share this deck with you that goes through this stuff in more detail. Again, it's Eric at thirdstage-consulting.com. And if you'd like to learn more about Third Stage, go to that same website too, thirdstage-consulting.com. And also, one other thing is, if you are interested in joining our Digital Stratosphere Conference, I'm going to put up a QR code on the screen right now. We are hosting first week of October in Denver, Colorado. You can join us in person, or you can join us virtually over the internet if you're from other parts of the world, or if you can't make it to Denver, Colorado. We are hosting a 3-day conference on digital transformation, digital strategy. We're going to talk about implementation readiness. In fact, we have a whole session that's dedicated to this topic. I'll be one of about 15 or 20 different speakers that'll be at this conference, talking about all the people, process, technology, strategy aspects of digital transformation. It's great entertainment, peer networking, all that good stuff. You can get 20% off if you use the promo code right here, STRAT20, STRAT20. You can get 20% off your registration. And again, you can register to be there in person. There's 2 different packages available. You can join just sort of your base package, or there's a VIP package where there's more smaller breakout sessions with me. There's a lunch with me and a couple of our other senior leaders at Third Stage, and some of the other, some high profile people that are going to be speaking at the event will be part of this VIP group as well. So we'll have 2 tracks the entire session. There's a VIP track, especially on the last day. There's a whole half day that's spent with me and a handful of other people that are very high profile people in the industry. So be sure to join us. I'd love to see you there. If you scan the QR code top left side of the screen, you can see the agenda and some of the speakers as it's shaping up right now. It's October 2nd through the 4th, Denver, Colorado, or you can join remotely. So hope to see you there. So be sure to check that out. And if you have questions about that, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well, or email me with the email address I just left you. So we're going to shift gears after a break here. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of what we just discussed and sort of debrief what we just discussed here in just a moment. We're also going to get into the role that executives can and should play on digital transformations. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So, Darian, we just had this conversation about phase 0 implementation planning. Got a lot of good conversation, good questions and comments from the audience. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
First of all, some really great questions from the audience. I think some questions that we have never gotten before on this podcast. I know that's something that you mentioned too, that maybe questions you've never been asked before. So that was always great to see and great to know that our audience is picking up on things that, we've never talked about before. But to follow up with some of those questions, one thing about phase 0 that I don't think we talked about was the team that goes into planning for phase 0. So could you give us a little, breakdown of everybody that should be on the phase 0 planning team?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, one of the audience members asked that question. I think I answered it in a different direction.
Unless I asked it, I think.
Oh, was that you that asked it? I couldn't remember who it was. Well, whoever asked it, I didn't completely answer the question, so I'm glad you're bringing it up again because I think I answered a different dimension of the question. But I'd say first of all, it's not like you need to have a separate, dedicated phase zero team. What I would say is if you have your core project team, whoever your core project team should be the ones that are sort of driving your implementation planning phase zero. Now, when we work with clients and helping them through the phase zero implementation planning, we've got a methodology and framework we bring to the table to help them through the process. But typically, we're working with that same project team that was involved in the software evaluation and selection, and the same project team that will continue to be involved through the implementation. Now, of course, you're going to bring in different subject matter experts and potentially, some outside consultants from the software vendor at select times of the phase zero planning. But the continuity should be that project core team. And I think the difference here, though, is that the project core team is focused primarily on implementation planning in phase zero during that phase of the project. And then once you get through that phase and you start to get into the execution and the actual implementation itself, then they shift gears and start to focus more on that. So it's not a matter of having a different team necessarily. I'd say you have largely the same core team there, but it's just their focus is different during phase zero. And that's where, if you leave a phase zero team, if you leave them to their own devices and ask them to go with their instincts and just do what they think is best, they're probably going to say, well, we don't know what to do in implementation planning in phase zero. Let's just go ahead and reach out to the software vendor and have them tell us what to do next. And they're going to tell us, by the way, to start designing and building software. So, that's where we come in, and that's where we add value, is to say, here are the things you can and should be doing, project team, as part of this phase zero. So I'd say it's the same project team, different focus during that phase.
That makes sense. I also know we got some other really good questions, like what do you do if your project team or the phase zero team or planning is not going in the direction you need it to be going? How do you kind of switch gears there? And I really like that conversation there, because I think a lot of companies don't know what to do once they get lost, I guess you could say, in that phase zero planning. How do you find your way back? So do you have anything else that you want to add to that conversation?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And actually, I meant to make this comment during the conversation with the audience there. And that comment is that phase zero and implementation planning is really important. You don't want to skip it. You want to spend a minimum amount of time and effort on it. But you can also take it too far, just like we talked about earlier in this episode with Agile. You take an Agile methodology, or just pick any methodology or philosophy, insert name here. It's possible you can take it too far. And same is true for the implementation planning phase zero. If you get to the point where you're getting into analysis paralysis and you're spending way too much time, for example, over analyzing your current state business processes, I don't know that there's a trigger or like an alert that goes off, that someone's going to recognize. But, we just qualitatively as consultants know that, okay, we're spinning our wheels here. We are not getting any sort of real value by continuing this conversation. So let's move on. And the same can be said for all of phase zero in general. You have to have sort of a clear exit out of phase zero and moving into the implementation, because otherwise you could spend, we've actually had some clients where you get 6 months into it and you say, okay, we've got a solid plan here. We don't have the answer to every single question out there, but we've got a really strong foundation. We have a strong direction. We have strong governance in place. We, have our change strategy. We know what our future state processes are going to look like. There's going to be things that might come up in the future that we still don't have answers to. There's some uncertainty still, of course. We're not going to be 100% comfortable, but it's time to move on. So I don't know that I can give you a strong quantitative indicator of any sort, but just having been through it before, you sort of know that once you complete these deliverables and you get they're not perfect, but you get a pretty solid start on them, it's time to move on and get into execution. Because otherwise, if you spend too much time in phase zero, they'll start to lose motivation. Your executive team will start to question, why are we still planning? We're 6, 9, 12 months in, we still haven't started the implementation. We're just still doing the planning. You want to avoid those conversations too. So you do want to spend enough time, but not too much time. And unfortunately, it's more of a qualitative instinct of having done it so many times where you've got to recognize that.
Is a good segue into our next segment here, which is the role of digital transformation leaders and executive sponsors. And with that, them knowing when to switch over from phase 0 to the next part could be a part of, what their role is in the digital transformation.
Yeah, and that came up during the conversation too, as far as what executives, how to educate executives on the importance of phase 0 and how to counter some of the messaging that sales software vendors will have with executives. And so that's part of what we talked about there. So this is a good segue into, the education to the education of and to executives on a project team. So we're going to play this video clip, and this is the video I was talking about earlier in the conversation around what executives can and should be doing to better support and lead their digital transformations, just to make sure they understand the expectations that we should have of them to be successful in a project, and also to learn from the mistakes of other executive teams that have not been effective and what are some of the common mistakes that they make. So this is really, if you're going to share a segment with your executive team, if you're not on an executive team already and you're reporting up to one, you might want to share this segment with them, which is coming up here. We're going to play this clip from our YouTube channel.
One of the first roles that's really important to understand as an executive is your role as an executive steering committee team member. And one of the first things that executive steering committee team members are tasked with is ensuring that there's justification for the project and ultimately approving the project for the organization. Now, obviously, the steering committee's role doesn't begin and end with the justification. It also entails keeping an eye on the project as the project evolves. So generally speaking, project teams will typically meet with the steering committee to provide an update on where the project is, share the major risks and issues that the team is facing, as well as give a status update on budgetary tracking, as well as the overall timelines and just how the overall project is evolving. The executive steering committee is generally comprised of the executive team in general. You generally want to make sure you have someone from IT, but more importantly, you want the executive leadership from different parts of the business. So you might have your CFO or your controller involved. You might have the head of manufacturing or your COO involved. You might have your head of supply chain involved. So essentially what you want on this executive steering committee is representation from all different parts of your business, and basically involve the people that are responsible at the executive level for the entire organization, in addition to the digital transformation project. Now, to be perfectly candid, this is probably the role that executives most commonly understand and that intuitively makes sense. They know that they have to approve the project. They know that they need to get an update on the project, and they know that they might have to hold some people accountable and make an occasional decision here and there. But it's the other stuff beyond the executive steering committee where executives get stuck, and oftentimes they overlook some of these other areas, and that's what I want to talk about through the rest of this video. Now, the executive steering committee is one aspect of how executives need to be involved. And again, that's the one that's most commonly understood. There's also the executive sponsor role. And generally speaking, the executive sponsor is also part of the executive steering committee. So you might have your COO, your CFO, or your CIO, or some combination thereof as the executive sponsor. Now, one of the challenges here is oftentimes organizations don't know who to make the executive sponsor, and oftentimes they don't end up designating one. They instead just defer to the executive steering committee, which is okay, you need the steering committee, but you do need to designate a single executive sponsor, ideally just one. Sometimes organizations will do two, but I would try to do one if you can. And I would also try to make sure it's not your CIO. And I mean no disrespect to CIOs out there that are watching this right now, but ultimately the executive sponsor should be someone from your business. It doesn't need to be your CEO, but it should be someone at the C-level or at the highest level ranks within your organization that represents the business. Where we've seen the most success with many of our clients is when whoever's the highest person within operations, so your chief operating officer, your head of supply chain, when someone like that is the executive sponsor, you're just going to have a different outcome than if you had a CIO or even a CFO involved. And the reason for that is because the COO generally understands broadly how the operations need to work within the organization. CFO might be too focused on finance and accounting and cost cutting and things of that nature. CIO might be too focused on the technology, and they may not have the same business credibility internally as the COO does. So that's why COO oftentimes makes sense. Now, of course, if you're implementing a specific solution or specific technology like an HR technology, then you'd want your chief HR officer to be the executive sponsor. If your implementation is just a finance and accounting system, then sure, make your CFO the executive sponsor.
But to the extent that your digital transformation cuts across multiple functions and different disciplines within your business, you still need to designate that one executive sponsor that's sort of the main decision maker and that main point of contact at the executive level beyond the steering committee that can be that conduit between steering committee and the overall project team. So now that we know what the executive sponsor does and what the executive steering committee needs to do at a high level, let's talk about what their roles are. And the role of executives within a project start with project oversight. And that's one of the biggest functions that these team members need to focus on. And project oversight means making sure that you're tracking to the budget, making sure that we're tracking to the implementation timeline, making sure that we're managing risks and that we're identifying and mitigating those risks, making sure that what we're delivering as a project team is actually supporting and enabling our broader strategic goals and objectives. So there's a lot of oversight that comes with this, and not to say that we want our executive team to be micromanaging the project team, but the executive team should be more involved than what they typically intuitively are going to think they need to be involved. And if you think about all the different changes and decisions that need to be made during a transformation, that's why the executive steering committee and the executive team members need to be so involved in some of the day-to-day aspects of the project in terms of just making decisions, or at the very least validating decisions that are being made by the overall project team. And this one can also be tricky because oftentimes what happens is the project team is working with the system integrator and software vendor or vendors. And the software vendor and system integrators are often feeding the inputs to the project team that they will then deliver to the executive steering committee. And oftentimes that combination creates an overly optimistic view of how the project is going. So executives need to really trust but verify and dig in deeper and understand what exactly is happening in the project and do their own due diligence to identify potential risks that maybe the project team isn't identifying. Oftentimes the project team and the outside consultants get so close to the project that they miss the forest for the trees and they don't see the bigger picture of the potential risks that are happening within the project or the ways that the project might be getting a bit misaligned with the overall direction of the company. So that's a big part of how executive team members need to stay involved and provide that sort of oversight, not just to make sure we're on time, on budget, but also to make sure we manage risk and keep the overall team aligned. Anytime an organization goes through a digital transformation, whether it's an ERP implementation or supply chain implementation or any other sort of technology and business transformation initiative, there are major decisions that need to be made that will materially affect your business for years to come. So in other words, this is not just a technology deployment, this is a business change. Your processes are going to change, people's roles are going to change, jobs are going to change, the way you're organized is going to change. And let me rephrase that. They may not change, but they should change. I should clarify that point right there. And if they're not going to change, then chances are pretty high that you're investing a lot of money in technology that isn't going to improve your business. So if you want to get an ROI out of your investment in technology and you want to improve your business, you have to assume that you're going to have to make a lot of decisions around what the business is going to look like in the future. And you don't necessarily want your project team making all those decisions in a vacuum. It's not that you don't trust them, it's not that they're not capable, but oftentimes that vision for what the organization needs to look like in the future, that vision oftentimes should come from the top. It should be based on the overall strategy and the overall direction and the overall strategic pivots that the executive team is making. And that's why executives need to stay so well connected to the project, because they have to provide that guidance and direction and clarity for the project team. So organizational and operational decision making is something that's very important. We always recommend that our clients have the project team maybe make some recommendations or provide some alternatives, but ultimately allow the executive team to make those decisions as part of their oversight role. Now, the final big role that executives should play in a digital transformation, if they want to be effective, is to ensure that there's organizational ownership and alignment. And this is the one that's the hardest to touch and see and feel, and it's the one that most commonly gets overlooked by executives. And what I mean by this is that they need to make sure that they're not becoming overly dependent on outside vendors and system integrators, for one. Too often, organizations don't know enough about digital transformation or technology initiatives, which is understandable. But what they do is, instead of building up their own competencies internally, they defer to the outside consultants. And the outside consultants will certainly fuel that, and they'll feed into it because they make more money by you doing that. So the executive role is oftentimes to say, hey, time out, let's figure out a way to bring more of this work in-house
so that we can enable our own team to be successful and to make decisions on behalf of the company rather than a software vendor or a third-party technology consultant making the decisions on behalf of the company. And this is something that we advise our clients and coach our clients on every day, is to help them figure out how can they take more control of the project, more ownership of the project, and ensure that their teams are aligned. And I talked earlier in this video about how project teams oftentimes will get misaligned with the overall strategy and direction that the executives have in their own mind. And that's something else that the executive team needs to do, is make sure that the project team stays aligned with where we're headed as an organization. And then finally, we also have to make sure that executives are keeping the entire organization aligned, not just the project team, not just at the executive level, but also at the front line level. All the different stakeholders, employees that are going to be affected by the changes that come from this transformation, they need to be aligned as well. And the leadership needs to start at the top. And the leadership within the organization needs to set the tone and the vision to the entire organization so that the entire organization is in sync and aligned. And to the extent that there is misalignment or there's resource shortages or there's something missing from the project, it's up to the executive team to make sure that the project team has what they need in terms of budget, resources, time, or whatever it is. And that's why executives need to be so actively involved in these projects for them to be successful. So I hope you found this information useful. I hope it gives you some direction on what executives' roles should be during a project. If you're not an executive, I encourage you to share this video with your executive team to help them understand better what to expect during a project like this. And if you'd like to learn more about digital transformation best practices and what to expect during a transformation, I encourage you to read our annual digital transformation report. We publish it each year. Contains a number of best practices and lessons from having helped so many organizations through their digital transformations over the years. It also contains a number of independent reviews, rankings, and technology comparisons for different providers in the marketplace. So I encourage you to download that. You can find that by scanning the QR code in front of you, or you can go to the links below.
So that's for my YouTube channel, where we talk about the importance of and scope of executive leadership and steering committees and what they should be doing to make projects more successful. We've got some follow-up we want to dive into and some follow-up questions we want to dig into. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting, and I want to invite you to join our annual tech-agnostic conference called Digital Stratosphere. Digital Stratosphere is a conference that features some of the industry's brightest minds, greatest thinkers, and it's a great opportunity to network with peers, other industry people, other CIOs, other project team members that are going through digital transformations or ERP implementations. We've got a great lineup of speakers this year. It's a 3-day event, a lot of great entertainment, networking opportunities. I'll be there as one of the keynote speakers, along with some of my favorite speakers in the industry as well, both within Third Stage Consulting, but also outside the company as well. So I encourage you to check it out and learn more. You can go to stratosphere2024.com to learn more about the event. You can see the agenda, the way it's shaping up, and you can see some of the past testimonials of people that have attended. And the event is October 2nd through the 4th, 2024. It's going to be based in Denver, Colorado, downtown Denver, beautiful downtown Denver in the fall, which is a great time to visit Denver if you haven't been. Again, stratosphere2024.com. Check out the agenda. Check out our early bird pricing for passes. And the other beautiful things, if you can't be here in person in Denver, which we hope you can, but if you can't, you can also join remotely as well. We have virtual passes available as well, so you're able to join from wherever in the world you might want to join from. So stratosphere2024.com, check it out, and I hope to see you there. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space, and she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance, You'll get real results, so you'll get some tangible results from the program, and you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
I'm gonna leave it all out there tonight. I'm gonna leave it all out there.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 191. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every week by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And you can also find past episodes of this show at that website as well, transformationgroundcontrol.com. And the podcast is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world to reach the third stage of digital transformation success. And so, Darian, we just played this video clip that talks about what executives should be doing to make themselves or make their project teams more successful. What were some of your thoughts and sort of knee-jerk reactions from seeing that clip?
Yeah, I think my favorite key point, I guess, from the video, you could say is, the role of an executive steering committee. And I think that term really emphasizes what we were just talking about before this segment as well, making sure that that committee really knows what the organization's goals are and when they're hitting those key milestones and when is the time to move on from those milestones and go to the next phase. I think that's something that for the steering committee is super important for the project, and it can be really good for executives. It shows leadership and the commitment to the success of the project when they are making sure that each goal and milestone is being reached with that oversight that they're having with their leadership. But with that, I guess I have some follow-up questions for you too. What are some qualities that you look for in an executive sponsor, especially from operations, to ensure that they're the right fit for the digital transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, if you're an executive team, or if you're on the executive team, you have sort of self-selected into the role, whether you like it or not. You sort of are part of that steering committee. I mean, usually it's the executive team that is the executive committee. There's always some exceptions to that. You might, have, certainly you have an executive sponsor who would be the person that's sort of, the single throat to choke. That's the buck stops here sort of thing, but they're usually part of the steering committee or the executive committee, which in turn makes them part of the steering committee. So I'd say, your executive team is generally your steering committee, and, you need to treat this project just like you treat any other major investment. Like if you're going to go acquire a company, or if you're going to potentially open a new manufacturing plant, or if you're going to make a decision to lay off hundreds of employees. I mean, those are all decisions that you as an executive team would spend a lot of time and focus on. And you should do the same with, your digital transformation. And you should avoid that temptation to delegate it and abdicate responsibility down to your IT department or down to your project team. You have to take a really active role, probably a more active role than you realize or are prepared to do. And that's part of why we wanted to share this video with you here today.
Yeah, for sure. And with this too, for executives, how do they ensure that a digital transformation project remains aligned with the company's long-term goals, especially when short-term pressures might push quicker wins?
Ooh, good question. It starts with, in the phase zero planning that we talked about earlier in this episode, we talked about how important it is to make sure that the overall digital strategy and the implementation plan aligns with what our overall company strategy is. And so it starts by defining that and clearly articulating that early on before you really get into the implementation. But then even as you go through the implementation, that's why it's so important for executives to stay involved in the project, because inevitably what happens is like you have this state of utopia up here that the executives are all focused on. They're focused on that future state, where we're going as an organization. And then they delegate the project down to this level, which is, call it the more mid-level management level, the core project team that's making the day-to-day decisions. Those guys and gals at the project level are fighting inertia. They're fighting gravity. They're fighting the way things have always been. There's all this pressure to bring them back to the way things are today. Executives over here look in this direction. Project teams getting not dragged down in a bad way. I don't mean it's a bad thing. It's just the reality of organizations, but it's sort of pulling them back to the way things have always been. And that's why executives need to stay involved. Like they have to stay involved so that they can fight that gravity, fight that inertia, and redirect and help the team pivot and help them make the difficult decisions they're going to have to make. Because if you think about like if you and I are in the office and we get surrounded by 10 of our colleagues that are all telling us we should do something or do something different, we're outnumbered. You and I might just give in and say, okay, these 10 people are right in front of us, all pissed off. I guess I'll just do what they want. Executives might be telling me something different, but I'm not going to see them for a few more weeks. But these 10 people are standing right here telling me what they want. So I'm just going to go with what they want. And by the way, I work with these people every day, so I'd rather make them happy than maybe the executives I only see so often. So that sort of dynamic you have to overcome. And the way to overcome that is to stay involved. And a lot of times executives think, well, we don't want to micromanage, or, well, we trust our team to do the right thing. Yeah, you can and should, but that doesn't mean you don't need to support them and give them the help they need to navigate some of that political reality of the organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one last question here. What are some common risks that you've seen in executive-led transformations, and how do you proactively manage or mitigate them?
Yeah, just for transformations in general, some of the most common risks are what we've described here today, getting out of sync with what the overall strategy of the digital transformation is versus the company strategy. Unrealistic expectations. I'd say change resistance is probably the biggest one, that we've talked a little bit about, but that's a big challenge because people tend to underestimate how difficult the changes are going to be. So those are, I don't know that there's any one risk, but those are, a handful of the risks that we most commonly see that executives need to be prepared for, and they need to be prepared to help overcome.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think this was probably super helpful for not only executives, but just teams in general that are going through digital transformations currently.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Yeah, good stuff. Well, thank you for your help and feedback on this discussion, Darian, and thank you to the audience for the great conversation and great comments and feedback. Love to hear your additional comments as it relates to what we talked about here today. Again, new episodes every week, same time, same place. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to keep up with new episodes and also see past episodes you might have missed. Again, that's transformationgroundcontrol.com. We will see you next week, same time, same place. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Take care.